Some people are afraid of the dark. Others are afraid of what the dark remembers. The emergency lights of Haven 9 painted the corridor in a dim blue glow as another ion storm rolled across the outer rim of the sector. Through the reinforced observation panels, streaks of electric light danced across the blackness of space, turning the station into a silent island surrounded by a restless sea of stars. Most residents had already retreated to their quarters. The station's usual hum felt distant tonight. Even the ventilation system seemed to whisper instead of breathe. In Habitat Ring C, Room 214 remained the only door that had not fully closed in 3 days. A narrow gap, barely 2 inches wide, separated safety from fear. Inside the room stood Soraya Venn. She had not moved for several minutes. Her slender blue fingers rested against the edge of the door, while her violet eyes remained fixed on the empty hallway beyond. The room assigned to her was warm, clean, secure. Every sensor on the station confirmed that no threat existed within 100 miles. Yet none of that mattered. Fear rarely listened to facts. The soft chime of a distant elevator echoed through the corridor. Soraya flinched. Her shoulders tightened instantly. The reaction happened so quickly, it almost looked mechanical, as though her body had learned the movement long before her mind could stop it. She waited, listening, counting. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Nothing followed. The hallway returned to silence. Slowly, she released the breath she had been holding. She hated the silence almost as much as sudden noise. Silence left room for memories, and memories always arrived uninvited. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal wall across the room. Silver-white hair, pale blue skin, eyes that looked older than they should. To anyone passing by, she appeared safe now. Rescued, protected, lucky. Those were the words people liked to use. Safe, protected, lucky. As if changing a location could erase what happened before. As if distance alone could heal fear. Somewhere deeper inside the station, a cargo latch slammed shut. The metallic sound echoed through several sections before fading. Away. Soraya stepped backward instinctively. Her pulse accelerated. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls closer. The ceiling lower. She closed her eyes. Just breathe. Just breathe. But breathing was difficult when every unexpected sound felt like a warning. Outside her door, the corridor remained empty. No guards. No doctors. No counselors. The station staff had eventually learned that too many visits only made things worse. So they gave her space. Unfortunately, space was exactly what frightened her most. Another flash of electric light illuminated the observation window at the end of the corridor. For a brief moment, shadows stretched across the floor. Then they vanished. Soraya stared at the open gap in her doorway. She could close it. Everyone told her she should. Lock it. Seal it. Sleep. Yet every night she tried, panic followed. The door would shut. The lock would click. And suddenly the room no longer felt like shelter. It felt like something else. Something she could never quite forget. The station clock quietly shifted past midnight. Haven 9 settled deeper into silence. But room 214 remained awake. And behind the partially open door, an alien girl stood guard against sleep itself. The maintenance tunnel smelled faintly of machine oil and recycled air as Ethan Walker tightened the final bolt on a damaged power relay. The small repair should have taken 15 minutes. Instead, it had consumed nearly 2 hours thanks to the ion storm rattling every sensitive system across Haven 9. He wiped a streak of grease from his hands and glanced toward the status display mounted above the junction panel. Most sectors had returned to normal operation. Most. Habitat Ring C remained highlighted in amber. Not dangerous. Not critical. Just unstable enough to keep the engineering department awake long after midnight. Ethan closed his toolkit and started back through the corridor network. The station was quieter than usual. Even the vending kiosks had dimmed their advertisements to conserve power. Somewhere overhead, a ventilation fan groaned before settling into a steady rhythm. The sound reminded him of an old cargo ship he had worked on years ago near the edge of Jupiter's orbit. Back then, every strange noise meant something was about to break. Tonight, the station itself was holding together just fine. It was the people inside it who worried him more. As he rounded a corner, a notification flashed across his wrist terminal. Resident observation update. Room 214. No sleep cycle detected. Ethan slowed his pace. He already knew who occupied room 214. Everyone on the station did. Not because she caused problems. The opposite, actually. Soraya Venn barely spoke to anyone. She attended medical evaluations. accepted meals, followed instructions when necessary. Then she disappeared behind her door. Most people respected her privacy. Others simply did not know what to say. Ethan understood that. Sometimes silence felt safer than the wrong words. The terminal displayed another line of data. Elevated stress indicators detected. No intervention requested. He stared at the message for several seconds before dismissing it. The system considered the situation normal, temporary, understandable. Yet the same report had appeared every night for nearly a week. Through a nearby observation window, blue-white lightning flashed across distant clouds surrounding the station. The storm illuminated the glass for a brief second before darkness returned. Ethan watched the reflection of his own face staring back at him. 38 years old. A few gray hairs beginning to appear. Tired eyes. Nothing particularly remarkable. He had spent most of his life fixing damaged systems because machines made sense. A broken circuit had a cause. A failed engine had a solution. People were different, especially people carrying wounds no scanner could measure. His route home would have taken him toward Engineering Deck 4. Instead, he found himself walking toward Habitat Ring C. The corridor lights grew softer there. Residential areas were designed to feel less industrial, though steel walls and reinforced bulkheads could only disguise themselves so much. As Ethan approached room 214, he noticed the door immediately. It was still open by exactly the same narrow gap. 2 inches. Maybe 3. Not enough for comfort. Just enough to see the hallway. He stopped. Several yards away. The station remained silent. Then he heard it. Not crying. Not movement. Just the faint sound of pacing. Slow footsteps crossing the room. Turning. Returning. Again and again. Like someone trying to outrun sleep without ever leaving the same place. Ethan stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet rhythm on the other side of the door. Then, without knocking, without speaking, and without moving any closer, he gently placed a sealed bottle of warm mineral water beside the wall opposite her room and continued down the corridor. He never saw the violet eyes watching from the narrow opening after he left. And Soraya never knew that for the first time since arriving on Haven 9, someone had noticed she was still awake. Morning arrived slowly on Haven 9. The ion storm had weakened during the night, leaving faint streaks of silver light drifting across the observation windows that lined Habitat Ring C. Most residents began their day the same way they always did. Coffee dispensers hummed to life. Transport carts rolled through service corridors. Maintenance crews checked systems stressed by the storm. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. Yet inside room 214, very little had changed. Soraya Vin had slept less than an hour. She sat near the partially open doorway with her knees drawn close, staring at the bottle of mineral water now resting on a small table beside her bed. The seal remained untouched. She knew exactly where it had come from. Nobody else used that brand. Haven 9 supplied filtered station water to residents. The bottle had been brought from the engineering sector. Someone had left it there intentionally. Someone had noticed. The realization should have comforted her. Instead, it made her nervous. Being noticed had rarely led to anything good. Her gaze drifted toward the narrow opening in the doorway. The hallway beyond remained empty. Quiet. Safe. Her logical mind understood that. The station had no enemies. No hunters. No reason for fear. Yet fear did not operate according to logic. It lived somewhere deeper. Somewhere older. A soft notification chimed from the room terminal. Daily wellness check available. She ignored it. Moments later, another message appeared. Nutrition reminder. Breakfast service active until 0900 hours. She ignored that too. The terminal eventually dimmed in surrender. Across the station, Ethan Walker was halfway through another maintenance shift when he noticed the same wellness report appearing on his engineering console. Resident inactive. Sleep cycle incomplete. Elevated stress markers continue. He frowned at the display. It was not technically his responsibility. The station employed counselors and medical specialists for situations like this. Yet every morning the same report appeared. Every morning the numbers looked slightly worse. Ethan picked up his coffee and stared through the engineering bay window. Beyond the glass stretched an endless field of stars. Tiny points of light scattered across impossible darkness. He had always loved space. Most people imagined adventure when they looked out there. Ethan saw distance. Billions of miles separating one fragile life from another. Maybe that was why loneliness seemed heavier on stations than planets. By noon, another storm advisory spread through Haven 9. Nothing dangerous. Just lingering electrical disturbances from the previous night. The kind that caused lights to flicker unexpectedly. the kind that made old memories harder to ignore. Near the end of his shift, Ethan found himself walking through Habitat Ring C again. He told himself he was inspecting power fluctuations. The excuse sounded reasonable enough. When he reached room 214, he noticed something different immediately. The bottle was gone. Not discarded. Not abandoned. Gone. He glanced toward the doorway. The gap remained open exactly as before. 2 inches. Maybe 3. For reasons he could not explain, the sight made him smile slightly. Then movement caught his attention. A faint shadow shifted behind the door. Someone was standing there, watching. Ethan stopped several feet away. He did not approach, did not knock, did not speak. The silence stretched between them. Finally, he crouched beside the wall and placed a small packet on the floor. Emergency thermal tea. Popular among maintenance crews during long shifts. Nothing special, just warm and calming. He stood again and turned to leave. A quiet voice stopped him. The words were barely louder than a whisper. Why? Ethan looked back toward the narrow opening. He could not see her face clearly. Only one violet eye reflecting the corridor lights. For a moment, neither moved. Then he answered honestly. Because everyone sleeps better with something warm nearby. The silence returned. Ethan nodded once and continued down the corridor. Behind the door, Soraya remained motionless long after he disappeared from view. It was the first conversation she had willingly started since arriving on Haven 9. The following evening, Haven 9 felt smaller than usual. Another storm front drifted across the sector, wrapping the station in waves of pale blue static that occasionally shimmered across the outer hull. The lights in Habitat Ring C flickered once before stabilizing. Most residents barely noticed. Soraya did. She noticed everything. She was standing beside the door when the first flicker came. Her body tensed immediately. The room remained warm, safe, quiet. Yet her eyes moved toward the narrow opening she still refused to close. Beyond it stretched the same empty corridor, the same polished floor, the same overhead lights. Nothing had changed, and somehow that made her more uneasy. Because fear did not need a reason. It only needed space. Earlier that day, she had finally opened the thermal tea packet Ethan left behind. The empty wrapper sat neatly folded on a shelf beside the untouched wellness reports. The drink itself had not changed much. It was slightly sweet, slightly bitter, ordinary. Yet she found herself thinking about it several times throughout the day. Nobody had asked her to drink it. Nobody had expected anything in return. The gesture made no sense according to the rules she had spent years learning. Every favor carried a cost. Every kindness came attached to conditions. At least that was how the universe had always worked. Somewhere down the hallway, a maintenance cart rolled past with a low electric hum. The sound gradually faded. Silence returned. Then footsteps appeared. Slow, steady, familiar. Soraya moved closer to the opening without realizing it. A tall figure entered view carrying a compact toolkit in one hand. Ethan Walker. He was not looking toward her room. His attention remained focused on a small wall panel several doors away. He opened the maintenance access cover and began working. For nearly 20 minutes, he said nothing. The only sounds were the occasional click of a tool and the distant murmur of station systems. Soraya watched from behind the door. He never once glanced in her direction. Never tried to start a conversation. Never pressured her to leave the room. It was strangely comforting. Eventually, Ethan finished the repair and began packing his equipment. Before leaving, he placed something on a nearby bench. A small portable lantern. The device emitted a warm amber glow instead of the station's usual blue lighting. Then he walked away. No explanation. No note. No request. Soraya stared at the lantern for several long minutes. Finally, curiosity overcame caution. She opened the door slightly wider than usual and stepped into the corridor. It was the first time she had done so voluntarily since arriving on Haven 9. The station air felt cooler outside her room. The corridor felt larger. For a moment her pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to retreat. Instead, she approached the bench. The lantern was old, scratched, well used. A handwritten label covered part of the battery compartment. Property of Ethan Walker. She touched the switch. The amber light brightened softly. Not harsh, not clinical, warm, almost like sunlight. Soraya stood there holding the lantern while the corridor remained quiet around her. Then she noticed something attached beneath it. A small piece of paper. 3 simple words written in dark ink. For the storms. Nothing more. No signature. No explanation. Just those 3 words. Soraya looked down the empty hallway where Ethan had disappeared. For the first time in a very long time, the station did not feel entirely unfamiliar. And when she returned to her room that night, the door remained open only 1 inch instead of 3. 2 days passed without another storm, and for the first time since arriving on Haven 9, Soraya developed something resembling a routine. It was not much by ordinary standards. She still spent most of her time inside room 214. She still checked the corridor before every step beyond the doorway. She still slept only a few hours each night. Yet small changes were beginning to appear. The amber lantern now rested on the shelf beside her bed instead of the storage cabinet. The wellness terminal messages no longer went completely ignored. And every evening, she found herself listening for a particular set of footsteps somewhere in Habitat Ring C. The realization annoyed her more than she wanted to admit. On the third evening, those footsteps arrived later than usual. Soraya noticed immediately. She had been sitting beside the observation window built into her room, watching distant cargo ships drift across the stars. The station clock displayed 8:47 p.m., then 9:03 p.m., then 9:16 p.m. The corridor remained empty. Her attention kept returning to the doorway. Eventually, she became irritated with herself. Why should it matter? Ethan Walker was an engineer. Engineers had schedules, repairs, responsibilities. The station did not revolve around one resident with sleeping problems. Yet when the familiar sound finally echoed through the corridor shortly after 9:30, she felt a strange sense of relief. Ethan appeared carrying a toolbox and a replacement circuit board nearly 3 feet long. He looked tired, more tired than usual. A dark stain of grease marked one sleeve of his work jacket. As he passed room 214, he offered a brief nod toward the partially open doorway before continuing down the hall. Nothing more. No conversation. No questions. For reasons she could not explain, Soraya stepped into the corridor. "You are late." The words left her mouth before she could reconsider them. Ethan stopped. He turned slowly, clearly surprised to hear her voice. For a moment neither spoke. Then a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. That sounds suspiciously like concern. Soraya immediately regretted speaking. It was an observation. Of course it was. He adjusted the heavy circuit board under one arm. Engineering lost power in 2 maintenance sectors. We have been chasing electrical problems all day. Her eyes shifted toward the equipment he carried. That looks heavy. 43 pounds. You should use a cart. The cart broke. That seems inefficient. Ethan laughed quietly. The sound caught her off guard. Not because it was loud, because it was genuine. Most people forced cheerfulness around her. Ethan never did. "You know," he said, "that is exactly what my supervisor told me." An awkward silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Soraya realized she was standing nearly 6 feet outside her room, the farthest she had willingly traveled since arriving on the station. Ethan seemed to notice as well, though he wisely chose not to mention it. Instead, he glanced toward the observation window at the end of the corridor. "The view is better tonight." She followed his gaze. A cluster of distant stars glimmered against the darkness. "I know." The answer surprised them both. Ethan shifted the circuit board again. "You watch them often?" Soraya hesitated. Then she nodded once. "The stars do not ask questions." Ethan considered that for a moment. "No, but sometimes they help people remember they are not as alone as they think." Neither spoke afterward. The silence lingered comfortably between them. Finally, Ethan continued toward the maintenance access panel farther down the corridor. Soraya watched him disappear around the corner. Then she looked down and realized something remarkable. For nearly 10 minutes, she had been standing outside her room. And for the first time, she had forgotten to be afraid. The next storm arrived without warning. One moment the stars beyond Haven 9 shone with crystal clarity. The next, waves of charged particles swept across the sector, painting the observation windows with ribbons of pale blue light. Throughout the station, warning indicators briefly flashed amber before returning to normal. Most residents continued their evenings uninterrupted. Soraya was not one of them. She was sitting near the observation window when the first surge struck the outer shields. A low vibration traveled through the floor beneath her feet, barely noticeable, yet her body reacted instantly. The room suddenly felt smaller. The silence felt heavier. She reached for the amber lantern on instinct and switched it on. Warm light spilled across the room. For a few moments, her breathing steadied. Then the station lights flickered. Once, twice, a third time. The room dimmed unexpectedly before stabilizing again. Soraya froze. Her pulse accelerated. Somewhere deep inside her memory, another corridor seemed to appear. Another room. Another door. She closed her eyes immediately. Not now. Please not now. The lantern remained steady in her hands. She focused on its glow, counted each breath. 1, 2, 3. Yet the feeling refused to leave. The station announcement system activated overhead. Attention residents. Temporary power fluctuations may occur during the current ion disturbance. Essential systems remain fully operational. The calm, automated voice should have reassured her. Instead, it reminded her how alone she was. She stood and moved toward the doorway. The opening remained narrow, only an inch. For several days, she had managed that much. It felt like progress. Tonight it felt impossible. Her eyes fixed on the corridor beyond. Empty, quiet, safe. Yet fear whispered otherwise. Minutes passed. Then footsteps appeared. Familiar footsteps. Slow, unhurried. Soraya felt her shoulders loosen before she realized why. Ethan emerged from the far end of the corridor carrying a diagnostic scanner. He was clearly responding to the station-wide power fluctuations. As he approached room 214, he noticed her standing behind the partially opened door. Their eyes met briefly. Neither spoke at first. Then Ethan raised the scanner slightly. Storm duty. Soraya glanced toward the device. More broken systems? Hopefully not. He smiled faintly. Although broken systems tend to keep me employed. To his surprise, she almost smiled back. Almost. Ethan continued checking nearby wall panels while the storm crackled beyond the station hall. Several minutes passed in comfortable silence. Then another surge rolled through Haven 9. This one stronger than the others. The corridor lights dimmed noticeably. A sharp breath escaped Soraya before she could stop it. Ethan looked up immediately. Not alarmed. Just attentive. The way someone notices a loose bolt before it becomes a problem. The backup systems are fine, he said calmly. Nothing is going anywhere. Soraya stared at the floor. I know. But knowing and believing are not always the same thing. She looked at him again. For a moment she considered saying nothing. Remaining safely behind her walls. Remaining hidden. Instead, a question escaped before fear could stop it. Do humans ever get afraid? Ethan leaned against the maintenance panel and considered the question seriously. Every day. The answer surprised her. Every day. He nodded. Sometimes of big things. Sometimes of small things. Sometimes of things that already happened. The corridor fell quiet again. Outside, another wave of blue light washed across the observation windows. Soraya held the lantern closer to her chest. And what do you do when that happens? Ethan looked toward the stars beyond the station glass. Then back at her. Usually I try not to face it alone. For several seconds neither moved. Then, for the first time since arriving on Haven 9, Soraya opened her door all the way. The storm intensified after midnight. Blue currents of charged particles rippled across the station hull, like silent waves striking a distant shore. Through the observation windows, the stars disappeared behind curtains of electric light. Haven 9 remained secure, but the atmosphere had changed. The station no longer felt calm. It felt watchful. Soraya stood in the doorway of room 214, the amber lantern glowing softly beside her. For the first time, the door behind her was completely open. The sight still felt strange. Exposed. Vulnerable. Yet somehow less frightening than before. Ethan remained several feet away near the maintenance panel, reviewing diagnostic readings on his scanner. He never moved closer unless invited. Never filled silence simply because silence existed. It was one of the reasons she trusted him more than she understood. Another surge rolled through the station. The corridor lights dimmed sharply before recovering. This time, however, a warning tone followed. A brief automated chime echoed overhead. Ethan immediately checked his scanner. His relaxed expression faded. That is new, he muttered. Soraya felt her stomach tighten. What happened? Ethan studied the display. One of the secondary power relays is struggling. Nothing dangerous yet. Yet, the word lingered in the air. Outside the observation window, another flash illuminated the corridor in pale blue light. For a moment the station seemed suspended inside a sea of electricity. Ethan tapped several commands into the scanner. Seconds later, another warning indicator appeared. He exhaled quietly. I need to check the relay room. Soraya's fingers tightened around the lantern handle. Now, if I wait, the problem could spread through this section. His voice remained calm. Professional. The same tone he used whenever discussing broken systems. Yet something inside her reacted immediately. A familiar feeling. Not fear of darkness. Not fear of the storm. Fear of departure. Fear of someone walking away. Ethan gathered his equipment without noticing the change in her expression. The relay room was only a few corridors away. He would likely be gone less than an hour. A perfectly reasonable situation. Yet reason suddenly felt very far away. He started toward the junction elevator. Then he heard her voice behind him. Will you come back? The question stopped him instantly. Not because of the words themselves. Because of the way she said them. Quiet. Careful. As though asking something much larger than it appeared. Ethan turned slowly. The corridor seemed unusually silent. Even the storm outside felt distant for a moment. Soraya lowered her eyes immediately, embarrassed by her own question. She hated how small it sounded. How vulnerable. But she could not take it back. Ethan looked at her for several seconds. Then he nodded. Yes. One simple word. No dramatic promises. No speeches. Just certainty. How do you know? She asked. Ethan glanced toward the scanner in his hand. Then back at her. Because I left my favorite lantern in your room. For the first time in days, a genuine smile appeared on Soraya's face. Small. Brief. Real. Ethan smiled too. Then he headed toward the elevator. The doors closed behind him with a soft mechanical hiss. The corridor became quiet once more. Yet something felt different. Soraya remained standing in the doorway watching the empty hall. Minutes passed. Then 20. Then 40. The storm continued outside. The station lights flickered occasionally. But the panic never arrived. Because for the first time, she realized she was not waiting for danger. She was waiting for someone to return. And somehow, that made all the difference. The relay repair took longer than expected. Nearly 2 hours passed while the storm continued to sweep around Haven 9. Inside room 214, the amber lantern cast its familiar glow across the walls. Soraya sat near the open doorway with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the distant sounds of station life. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the corridor. Every few minutes it remained empty. Yet something remarkable had happened. The emptiness no longer felt threatening. It simply felt unfinished. Outside, the storm gradually began to weaken. The flashes beyond the observation windows became less frequent. The station lights stabilized. One by one, warning indicators across the habitat ring returned to normal. Finally, shortly after 2 in the morning, familiar footsteps echoed through the corridor. Soraya looked up immediately. Ethan emerged from around the corner carrying his scanner and toolkit. He looked exhausted. His jacket was wrinkled. A streak of dust marked one shoulder. Yet the moment he spotted the open doorway, he smiled. Told you I would be back. The words were simple, casual, but something inside Soraya tightened unexpectedly. Not with fear, with relief. Ethan approached slowly and stopped beside the doorway. Everything stayed operational, he said. The relay decided not to become a disaster. Soraya nodded. That is good. Ethan glanced toward the lantern glowing beside her. I see my security device performed admirably. A faint laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. It was soft, brief, yet it felt strangely important. Ethan leaned against the wall across from her room. There it is. Soraya frowned slightly. What? The laugh. She looked away immediately. It was not that impressive. Disagree. He folded his arms. I think it deserves official recognition from station management. Another smile appeared despite her efforts to hide it. The corridor settled into comfortable silence. Outside, the last traces of the storm drifted away into deep space. Through the observation windows, stars slowly began to reappear. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Tiny points of light scattered across endless darkness. Ethan followed her gaze. Beautiful, right? Soraya stared at the stars for several seconds. When I first arrived here, I hated looking at them. Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. Why? She hesitated. For a moment, she considered changing the subject. Instead, she took a slow breath. Because they reminded me of distance. The words came quietly. Every star looked impossibly far away. Every light felt unreachable. Ethan remained silent. Waiting. Not pushing. Just listening. Soraya looked down at her hands. When you spend enough time afraid, everything begins to feel far away. Safety. Trust. Other people. Her voice softened further. Hope. The corridor became very still. Ethan studied the stars beyond the window before answering. You know what I see when I look out there? Soraya shook her head. Connections. She glanced toward him. Connections? Ethan nodded. Every light belongs to somewhere. Every place belongs to someone. Sometimes we just need a little time to find our way between them. Soraya looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back toward the stars. For the first time since arriving on Haven 9, they no longer seemed distant. Because somewhere between the storms, the lantern, the quiet conversations, and the simple promise to return, She had already begun finding her way back. 3 weeks later, Haven 9 drifted peacefully through a sea of stars untouched by storms. The emergency alerts had fallen silent. The power systems remained stable. Life aboard the station had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Yet for Ethan Walker, one detail remained extraordinary. Room 214 no longer kept its door open. The first time he noticed it, he nearly walked past without realizing. The door was fully closed. Not locked. Not sealed. Just closed. A simple thing. Most residents would never have thought twice about it. Ethan stopped anyway. For several seconds, he stared at the smooth metal surface reflecting the corridor lights. Then a small smile appeared. Sometimes the biggest victories looked invisible to everyone except the people who earned them. He continued down the hallway toward another maintenance assignment. Before he reached the corner, however, the door opened. Soraya stepped into the corridor carrying the amber lantern. Ethan blinked. "You know," he said, "that lantern technically belongs to engineering. Then engineering should file the proper paperwork." He laughed. "I was afraid you might say that." They began walking together toward the observation deck. Not because either of them planned it. It simply happened. The same way many important things do. The station was quiet at this hour. Most residents were asleep. Through the observation windows, starlight spilled across the corridor floor in silver reflections. Soraya paused near the glass and looked outward. Thousands of distant suns glowed against the darkness. The view had not changed. She had. Ethan leaned against the railing beside her. "Could not sleep?" he asked. Soraya considered the question carefully. Then she shook her head. "Actually, I woke up." Ethan looked surprised. "That sounds like progress." "I think so too." For a few moments they watched the stars in comfortable silence. Then Soraya spoke again. "Do you remember the night you left to repair the relay?" Ethan nodded. "I remember." She held the lantern gently in both hands. "After you left, I realized something." He waited. "For a long time, I thought fear came from darkness." Her violet eyes reflected the distant stars beyond the glass. But it never did. Ethan remained silent. Soraya smiled faintly. "Fear came from believing nobody would return." The words settled softly between them. No drama. No tears. Just truth. Ethan looked toward the stars. "That is a heavy thing to carry alone." "Yes." She glanced toward him. It was. The station lights dimmed automatically for the overnight cycle. Soft amber illumination replaced the brighter daytime settings. The observation deck grew quiet. Peaceful. Familiar. Soraya looked down at the lantern one last time before setting it carefully on the railing between them. "You never asked me to trust you." Ethan shrugged. Trust does not work very well when someone demands it. Another small smile appeared. Then both returned their attention to the stars. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Neither bothered checking the time. Finally, Soraya spoke one last sentence. Barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming back." Ethan looked at her. The stars reflected in her violet eyes now. Not distant. Not unreachable. Simply there. Part of the same sky. He nodded once. "Anytime." Beyond the glass, endless constellations stretched across the galaxy. Silent. Ancient. Watching. And somewhere within that vast ocean of darkness, one alien girl finally understood something she had forgotten long ago. Safety was not a place. It was a person who kept their word. And for the first time in years, when she returned to her room and closed the door behind her, she slept until morning.